too, because having a home is hard work. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. Geico.com. Easy.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com.
6:07, Team Hochberg Traffic Center time, and Jim Telemonte.
On Chicago's west side, there's closure of Erie Street between Austin and Mayfield after an earlier fire. Veterans Memorial Tollway southbound at Army Trail. Crash just reported. Traffic had been light. Prepare to slow down approaching the scene. There's some road work in that area northbound wrapping up between St. Charles and the Army Trail Toll Plaza. Edens looks good. Inbound Kennedy, little tight. Chicago Avenue to Ohio. It's fine outbound. Inbound Eisenhower, traffic slow. Manheim to Des Plaines Avenue and western to Racine. 34 minutes, 390 to downtown. Outbound fine at 28. Around Stevenson, a few minutes worth of delays starting before Cicero. Inbound Ryan, looking at 19 minutes, 95th to downtown. Bishop Ford, about a 4-minute delay approaching the merge. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, our meteorologist Steve Williams.
Today, mostly cloudy skies, a bit of snow this afternoon, little or no accumulation, high 38. Snow tonight, 2 to 4 inches expected, low 20. Cloudy, cold, snow and flurries tomorrow, another 1 to 2 on the way, the high 24. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
25 at O'Hare, next news 6:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by CharlesEquipment.com, keeping you powered up no matter what the conditions.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
On Monday that it's time to take prosecution of sanctuary jurisdictions to the next level, specifically in New Jersey and King County, Washington State, where local and state laws are running afoul of federal immigration law. There is this thing called the Supremacy Clause. There is this responsibility the federal government has to enforce our immigration laws, and it's about time. It's about time. Let's hear from Attorney General Barr on the topic.
And although local communities frequently feel the effects of unfettered illegal immigration and the effects of criminal aliens, the only authority in the country that is vested with the power and the responsibility of dealing with that problem is the federal government. No state can deal with it alone.
And as I mentioned yesterday, importantly included in his remarks was this notion that the Department of Justice will go after jurisdictions and or politicians who run afoul of federal immigration law, like that mayor of Oakland, who wasn't gone after, and she should have been.
Because she was harboring fugitives.
Aiding and abetting.
Aiding and abetting, told them they were coming and hid them. And that's a crime.
And so, again, there's no need to manufacture anything. But if you have a politician believe that he or she can break the law and intercede on behalf of criminals or alleged criminals against law enforcement, federal law enforcement, then that politician needs to be held to account. And I hope and I believe Attorney General Barr is serious about that. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Ken Cuccinelli, Principal Deputy Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency and Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you all.
Good. So this seems to me like I know this is the funding is not the purview of the Department of Justice, but just in terms of a multi-pronged approach to dealing with those jurisdictions and those politicians that want to interrupt the enforcement of federal immigration law. The purse strings is one thing, but enforcing the rule of law, including on politicians, is a whole other matter.
Yeah, and you referenced some of General Barr's comments yesterday. I'd also note that in Massachusetts, the U.S. Attorney has brought charges against a state judge who was hustling some criminal illegals out the back door of the courthouse.
Oh, that's right.
And I don't know whether you remember that
Yeah,
one.
that's right.
We do.
I'd
yeah,
forgotten.
Those are pending. That's a pending case. So you all are on the money in your formulations of it, the aiding and abetting and so forth. That is entirely plausible, and we'll see what the Justice Department has in store here. But I hope 5 more years of this kind of work. But certainly in the Department of Homeland Security, we deal with the other end of it. We're the ones actually trying to do the enforcement, and we're doing it. But when you get localities that politicize law enforcement, and mind you, in American history, state, local, federal law enforcement have typically ignored politics. They work together. They keep each other safe. They've got each other's back. And now they all have their own jurisdictions, but that's been a very cooperative arrangement throughout American history. There are a very limited number of times when politics has invaded law enforcement, and they have all been black marks on our history. And this is another one. This is not. This is keeping people unsafe, both in the communities and law enforcement officers themselves. We had a couple ICE officers who were assaulted while arresting a removable illegal in New York City last week. They were both hospitalized. They got their man, but it was a violent tussle. Things like that went on the city streets. Those sorts of handoffs should happen in city jails.
Yeah,
where everybody is safe. And obviously, locally, that's an issue. We have this issue with King County. You saw they're suing, the Department of Justice is suing them because they don't want us to use their airport to deport people. Well, too bad. Then don't build an airport.
All right. Well, how's the morale, though, knowing that all these people and even, judges and people who run airports and government officials are against you?
Well, certainly in DHS and in ICE, we know we're under the gun, and there is a lot of vitriol directed our way. But frankly, it's sort of fortifying because we know why. It's because we're doing our job. If we weren't doing a good job, they wouldn't complain.
Right.
The problem is they don't like the laws we're enforcing. And what's darkly amusing to me is when I hear congressmen who write the laws gripe and moan about it, and they have the power and authority to do something about it, and yet they don't.
I wanted to also, you mentioned the King County case, wanting the federal government to have access to their airport. Talk to us about also the case in New York State, because, if New York State comes up with a loony idea, it's sure to be adopted in Illinois and California and other states post-haste. Their green light law and how Homeland Security is responding to their green light law.
So what they call their green light law blocks basic DMV information from ICE and Customs Border Protection. And remember, New York's a border state. They get a lot of Canadian crossing back and forth. That's a good thing. It's a positive thing when it's secure and safe for those involved and America, and it usually is. But to keep it safe, we have to know who's coming across our border, and the most basic way that's accomplished by U.S. law enforcement at every level is starting with those DMV bits of information. Is this license I'm holding real? Is the person it represents as being person X really person X? And we need to access DMV databases to find that out. And you've probably heard in other discussions, in terms of raw numbers, the most dangerous thing that happens in law enforcement is pulling over a car. And it's not because every car is going to blow up on an officer. It's because it happens so many times a day that the odds start to stack up with the officers. And they need to know everything they can know when they approach that vehicle about what they're facing in that vehicle. Do they have a fugitive warrant? Are they literally walking up on a wanted criminal? Or is it just somebody who is breaking the speed limit? And by New York barring access to that information, they've barred the opportunity to see the most basic building block of officer safety and law enforcement. And so we responded by telling New York that among our many trusted traveler programs, pretty much all of them except TSA PreCheck so far, New Yorkers will not be able to enroll or renew their participation in those. And remember, they're a border state. They cross that border quite a bit, thousands of times a day. And by the end of 2020, about 250,000 New Yorkers who wanted to be in those trusted traveler programs will not be. And another 150 to 200,000 a year will not be renewed for the following 4 years until there are literally no New Yorkers left in those programs.
Well,
and we keep these options on the table for other states as well.
And it demanded a response because of exactly what I said. You're going to have other similarly politically inclined states mimic them if you don't do something.
That's right.
I wanted to get your reaction to this new way forward legislation that has been discussed, introduced in the House by another illustrious Illinois Congressman, Chuy Garcia, that would basically deal with illegal immigration by just eliminating the illegal. That there's no such thing as illegal immigration anymore, and that's the way you figure it out. What that would mean for law enforcement, what that would mean for national security.
Well, border security is national security, and it certainly wipes it out at that point. And I see stuff like that at a policy level, and I don't really think they believe it. I think that it's so extreme that no one could possibly, who's actually sworn an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution, which they all have, could actually believe that. I think that it's more political gamesmanship to wave in front of their extremely left-wing base and say, "Look what a great guy I am." But in practical terms, if you implement something like that, you wipe out the ability of much of your federal law enforcement to protect America and Americans. And a lot of people who back policies like that will say, "Well, we want to get the terrorists." Well, I got news for you: the terrorists, the human cargo, the drug cargo, they all come in the same pipes. And those pipes are set up by the same evil people. You can trace them back not just to, but to the Mexican drug cartels that are organized criminal organizations that frankly operate like terrorists. And that's right on our border. If we want to just open the pipes to those folks, we're going to reap the whirlwind, and it will be even uglier than what we see now.
Now, I'm all for law enforcement and border security and the work that the Homeland Security Department does. However, that doesn't mean that it's all unqualified and without concerns. And I want to get your reaction to some of the concerns that have been leveled against the Real ID that is in the process of full implementation by October. The concerns, the privacy concerns people have about the sorts of information and that government may demand of American citizens on a go-forward basis, and whether or not this is really in the interests necessary to advance the interests of national security, and is not does not potentially increase the peril of government using this sort of information against American citizens to control them in material ways and move in the area of retina scans and DNA material and that sort of thing.
Well, look, you're talking to a libertarian conservative. I appreciate those concerns very much, and as a state legislator, I was very particular about how we would do Real ID in Virginia, and we are, theoretically on the verge of that going into effect in October of this year, and I will say that across the DHS enterprise, because of the challenges with what I'll call information-based identities. So person X comes across the border and tells you their name is person X. It's awfully hard for us to verify that, particularly internationally. And a lot of the information, as we were talking about earlier in our conversation, that we draw from is in those DMV databases. So we end up comparing against some of those to try to really exclude people from consideration. But there's no question that CBP, for instance, is experimenting with using facial recognition to move people through their processes faster, but also at the border. So we go to a biometric-based identification instead of information-based. So we don't have to believe person X that they're person X. We have a thumbprint, or we have, the facial recognition face print. I'm not quite sure exactly the term there, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
I will say that the only absolute way, and you're talking to a guy who sued the NSA over their metadata gathering back a few years ago. The only absolute way to avoid misuse of information, even something as simple as a passport, is not to ever have it. And that's a decision that was made by Congress years back and has been revisited but not changed.
But I think
in terms of the balance between privacy and security.
And I think people want to know, and you're in a position to tell them that these conversations are happening in Homeland Security, concerns about making sure this information and particularly when you get into AI and facial recognition is being protected, so that there's not the same sort of exposure to identity theft that we've seen in big corporations, for example. Just that that Homeland Security and the federal government is thinking about these things, talking about these things, trying to establish protocols and security.
Yeah, and we absolutely are, and we do it. We do it in tandem with all the other developments in the program. So that's done hand in hand, and it is a priority for us. And in fact, we do completely separate reports on just privacy and protection of the information. So we've got our eye on it, and it is of concern to us. This is not a one-way street of just get additional information and use it for our security purposes. There's also the question of protecting it, and that is something that we take quite seriously. So, that's something you all can be assured of.
He is Ken Cuccinelli, Principal Deputy Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency and Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Ken, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be with you all.
Take
Have
care.
a great day.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
It may not be stomach issues.
For me, it's intense gas, or pain, or diarrhea, sometimes all at once, over and over.
I spent years with the symptoms but could never figure it out. No matter what I did, they never went away. So I decided to break it down for my doctor and get really specific about my symptoms.
We discovered that exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI, may be the reason for my stomach issues.
EPI is caused by my pancreas. It